The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian, its curved walls displaying the home worlds of 47 different species. Ambassador Zethkri of the Valtheran Empire adjusted his ceremonial robes as he prepared to deliver humanity's death sentence. Around him, representatives from across the galaxy murmured in dozens of languages, their various appendages clicking, rustling, and chittering with anticipation. "The motion before us today," Zethkri announced, his voice amplified by quantum resonators, "concerns the immediate quarantine and subsequent exile of species designation Sol 3, commonly known as humans." The chamber fell silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems calibrated for 47 different atmospheric requirements. High Counselor Mirathon of the Crystalline Collective rose from her meditation platform, her translucent form shimmering under the chamber's artificial suns. "The evidence against the humans is overwhelming," she began, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "In the mere 50 years since first contact, they have violated 37 interstellar treaties, engaged in unsanctioned technological development, and worst of all, they refuse to submit to our guidance protocols." A holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, showing Earth as a blue marble suspended in space. Red markers appeared across its surface, each one representing what the Council considered a violation of galactic law. The markers multiplied until the planet looked diseased. "They develop weapons instead of art," hissed Ambassador Silthara of the Serpentine Hegemony, her forked tongue tasting the air. "They question our authority instead of accepting our wisdom. They spread across their solar system like a plague, building colonies without permission from the appropriate regulatory bodies." The truth was simpler and more terrifying than the Council wanted to admit. Humanity was advancing too quickly. In 5 decades, they had gone from primitive rockets to fusion drives, from radio telescopes to quantum communication arrays, from single-planet dwellers to system-wide colonizers. Other species had taken millennia to achieve similar progress under careful Council supervision. Dr. Sarah Chen, Earth's sole representative, stood in the defendant's circle at the chamber's center. The humans had been granted only one voice in this trial, while their accusers numbered in the hundreds. She was a xenobiologist by training, chosen for her diplomatic skills rather than her political connections. Now she found herself defending her entire species. "Honored Council members," she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "Humanity requests to know the specific charges against us. We have followed all established protocols for technological development submissions. Our colonies operate within the boundaries of our own solar system. We have not interfered with any other species' territory or violated any territorial agreements." Zethkri's mandibles clicked in what his species considered laughter. "You humans always focus on the letter of the law while ignoring its spirit. Yes, you submit your technology reports as required, but you develop 10 new innovations for every one you report. Yes, you remain in your solar system, but you multiply and spread like bacteria, turning every rock into a military outpost." The accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth. Humanity had been enthusiastic in their expansion, establishing research stations, mining operations, and habitation modules throughout the Sol system. What the Council saw as aggressive militarization, humans considered prudent infrastructure development. "The Galactic Preservation Protocols are clear," intoned Chancellor Korthek of the Machine Consciousness, his mechanical voice cutting through the chamber's acoustics like a blade. "Emerging species must demonstrate peaceful intent, technological restraint, and cultural harmony before achieving full galactic citizenship. Humanity has failed all 3 criteria." Dr. Chen felt the weight of 47 civilizations pressing down on her. Each species in the Council had gone through this same process, accepting limits on their growth and development in exchange for galactic membership. They had traded ambition for security, innovation for stability. Now they expected humanity to do the same. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Complete quarantine of the Sol system," Zethkri announced formally. "Interdiction fields will prevent any human vessel from leaving your star system. All trade agreements are hereby terminated. All cultural exchanges are suspended. Humanity will be given 100 standard years to prove they can develop within acceptable parameters. If they fail to demonstrate sufficient progress toward galactic harmony, permanent exile protocols will be initiated." The vote was a foregone conclusion. 46 species voted in favor of quarantine, with only humanity dissenting. Dr. Chen watched the holographic tally appear above her head, each vote sealing her species' fate like nails in a coffin. But as she prepared to transmit the Council's decision back to Earth, Dr. Chen noticed something that chilled her blood. The Galactic positioning system showed massive fleet movements throughout Council space. Ships were being recalled from border regions. Defensive formations were being established around key systems, and military production facilities were spinning up to maximum capacity. The Council wasn't just quarantining humanity. They were preparing for war. One final question, Dr. Chen said, her voice carrying across the chamber. What happens if humanity refuses to accept this quarantine? The silence that followed was deafening. Then Zethakri's mandibles clicked again, but this time there was no humor in the sound. Then we will make the choice for you. As Dr. Chen activated her quantum transmitter to send word back to Earth, she couldn't shake the feeling that the Council had made a terrible mistake. They saw humanity's rapid development as reckless expansion, but they failed to understand what drove it. Humans didn't innovate out of aggression or greed. They innovated out of an unshakable belief that tomorrow could be better than today. The galaxy was about to learn the difference between a species that had been carefully managed for millennia and one that had spent its entire history fighting for survival. The Council expected humanity to submit, to accept their place as junior members of galactic civilization. They were about to discover that humans had never been very good at accepting the impossible. Admiral Marcus Kane stood before the holographic display in the United Earth Defense Force Command Center, watching as alien ships took positions around the Sol system. The interdiction fleet was massive beyond anything humanity had ever imagined, stretching from Mercury's orbit to the asteroid belt. Each vessel dwarfed Earth's largest battleships, their hulls gleaming with technologies humanity barely understood. Status report, Kane commanded, his weathered face illuminated by the tactical displays surrounding him. 347 capital ships. Admiral, reported Captain Lisa Rodriguez, the fleet's intelligence officer. They're maintaining position at exactly 4 astronomical units from the sun, well outside our maximum weapons range. Long-range scans show they're deploying some kind of energy barrier. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the project director for humanity's most classified research program, stepped forward. Her laboratory coat was wrinkled from 72 hours of continuous work, and her eyes held the intensity of someone who had just made a breakthrough that could change everything. Admiral, I need to brief you on Project Prometheus, she said quietly. Everything we've been working on for the past 15 years just became operational. Kane nodded grimly. He had approved the black budget funding for Prometheus without fully understanding its scope. Now, with an alien armada surrounding Earth, he suspected he was about to learn exactly what his money had bought. The briefing room was secured with technology that made conventional encryption look like children's toys. As Dr. Vasquez activated the holographic projectors, Kane felt the familiar tingle of quantum scramblers ensuring their conversation would remain private. Project Prometheus began as a theoretical exercise, Vasquez explained as star maps filled the air around them. We asked ourselves a simple question. If humanity ever faced an existential threat from a superior force, how could we not just survive but win? The display shifted to show technical schematics that made Kane's head spin. Ships that looked nothing like conventional human designs. Weapon systems based on principles he didn't recognize. And most disturbing of all, what appeared to be artificial intelligence networks of staggering complexity. The Galactic Council made a critical error in their assessment of human technological development, Vasquez continued. They assumed we were advancing linearly, improving existing technologies step by step. They never considered that we might be developing revolutionary approaches in complete secrecy. Kane studied the schematics more carefully. The ships looked organic, almost grown rather than built. Their hull configurations defied conventional engineering, with surfaces that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. Doctor, are you telling me we've been building a secret fleet? Not just building, Admiral. Growing. The breakthrough came when we realized that traditional manufacturing would never allow us to compete with species that had millennia of technological development. So we took a different approach. We combined human innovation with something the galaxy has never seen before. Biological engineering on a macro scale. The display zoomed in on one of the strange ships, revealing details that made Kane's breath catch. The hull wasn't metal at all, but some kind of living tissue. Weapon systems that looked more like organs than machinery. Propulsion systems that pulsed like hearts. We've created living ships, Admiral. Each one is essentially a massive organism, designed and bred for specific military functions. They grow rather than being manufactured, they adapt rather than being programmed, and they reproduce rather than being replaced. Kane felt a chill run down his spine. How many? The first generation consisted of 12 prototype vessels. Each one has been reproducing for the past 8 years. Current estimates put our available fleet at over 4,000 ships, with production accelerating exponentially. The implications were staggering. While the Galactic Council had spent the last 50 years watching humanity's publicly declared technological progress, humans had been secretly developing an entirely new form of warfare based on principles that no other species had ever imagined. Where are they? Kane asked. Hidden throughout the solar system, sir. Some are dormant in the asteroid belt. Others are buried in the ice of Europa and Enceladus. Many are actually invisible to conventional sensors, using biological camouflage that makes them indistinguishable from space debris. Captain Rodriguez pulled up intelligence reports from the past week. Admiral, this explains the anomalous readings we've been getting from our deep space monitoring stations. The Council fleet keeps reporting phantom contacts that disappear when they investigate. Vasquez nodded. Our ships have been shadowing their vessels since they arrived, learning their capabilities, mapping their weaknesses, preparing for what comes next. Kane walked to the observation window, looking out at the star-filled void where humanity's fate was being decided. Doctor, I need you to be completely honest with me. Can we win? The Council fleet is larger and individually more powerful than anything we can field, Vasquez admitted. But they're also predictable. They've been fighting the same way for thousands of years, using the same tactics, the same technologies, the same strategic thinking. They've grown comfortable in their superiority. She manipulated the display to show tactical simulations. Our biological ships can adapt in real time to changing conditions. They can heal from damage, evolve new capabilities during combat, and coordinate with a precision that traditional fleets cannot match. Most importantly, they can think. Each ship has a distributed consciousness, Admiral. Not artificial intelligence in the traditional sense, but genuine biological thought processes optimized for warfare. They can make tactical decisions faster than any computer system, and they can do it while simultaneously managing thousands of different biological functions. Kane turned back to face his staff. And the ethics of this? We're talking about creating living weapons, possibly sentient ones. Dr. Vasquez's expression grew solemn. That was the hardest part of the project, sir. But every consciousness we've created volunteered for this. They're not slaves or tools. They're partners who share our commitment to human survival and freedom. The Admiral processed this information, weighing the moral implications against the stark reality of the alien fleet surrounding Earth. The Galactic Council had made their intentions clear: submit or face the consequences. They had expected humanity to fold, to accept their inferior position in galactic civilization. When can we be ready to deploy? Kane asked. The fleet is already in position, Admiral. They've been waiting for your orders since the Council's ultimatum was delivered. Kane looked around the room at the faces of his officers. Each one understood what they were contemplating. Humanity was about to reject the galaxy's demands and instead launch the first preemptive strike in interstellar history. Gentlemen, ladies, Kane said formally, I want recommendations from each department. We have 6 hours before the Council's deadline expires. I need to know our chances, our risks, and our alternatives. As his staff dispersed to prepare their reports, Kane remained at the observation window. Somewhere out there in the darkness, an alien armada waited to enslave his species. And hidden among the asteroids and moons of humanity's home system, a fleet of living ships prepared to teach the galaxy that humans had learned more than just how to build better weapons. They had learned how to create new forms of life dedicated to ensuring that freedom would never be negotiable. Commander Sarah Mitchell felt the neural link with her ship activate as she settled into the biological interface chair. The sensation was unlike anything conventional pilots experienced. Instead of controlling a machine, she was merging consciousness with a living entity that had chosen to bond with her. Ready, Sarah. The ship's voice whispered directly into her mind. The consciousness called itself Harbinger. and over the past 3 years of partnership, they had developed a relationship that transcended traditional pilot-aircraft dynamics. The others are awakening. Through Harbinger's senses, Sarah could perceive the hidden fleet stirring to life throughout the solar system. In the asteroid belt, ships that had masqueraded as tumbling rocks for months began to unfold, their biological hulls shifting from camouflage patterns to active combat configurations. Near Europa, vessels that had been dormant beneath kilometers of ice pushed upward, breaking free with organic grace that made them look like whales surfacing from an ocean. The Galactic Council's interdiction fleet remained in their rigid formations, confident in their technological superiority. Their sensors, designed to detect conventional metal and ceramic spacecraft, were blind to the biological signatures of humanity's true fleet. Admiral Kane's voice crackled across the quantum communication network. "All units, this is Command. Operation Phoenix is now active. Remember, we're not just fighting for Earth. We're fighting for the right of every species to determine their own destiny." Sarah felt Harbinger's emotions pulse through their shared connection, anticipation, determination, and something that might have been joy. The ship had been born for this moment, literally bred for combat but also gifted with the capacity to choose its own purpose. "The Council ships are repositioning," Harbinger observed, its biological sensors painting a three-dimensional picture of the enemy fleet. "They're forming defensive clusters around their command vessels. Predictable." That predictability was exactly what Dr. Vasquez had counted on. The Galactic Council had perfected warfare through millennia of conflicts, developing tactics and strategies that had proven effective against every threat they had ever encountered. But they had never faced an enemy that could evolve new capabilities in real time. The first phase of the attack began with what appeared to be a massive systems failure throughout human space. Communications satellites went dark, defense platforms powered down, and the few visible human ships began broadcasting surrender codes. To the Council fleet, it looked like humanity was capitulating even before the deadline expired. High Admiral Zethkri, commanding the interdiction force from his flagship, watched the human surrender with satisfaction tinged by disappointment. He had hoped for more resistance, more opportunity to demonstrate the consequences of defying galactic order. "Maintain positions," he ordered his fleet commanders. "Deploy boarding parties to secure key installations. Begin preparation for occupation protocols." It was exactly the response the human strategists had anticipated. Council doctrine called for immediate occupation following surrender, with military forces moving to secure critical infrastructure before any deception could be attempted. The alien ships began advancing toward Earth, Mars, and the major space stations, their formations opening to allow for rapid deployment. That was when the hidden fleet struck. Sarah felt the moment of attack like an electric shock through her nervous system. Harbinger and 30 other bioships materialized from apparent nothingness around the Council's left flank, their hulls shifting from camouflage to active combat configuration in seconds. The biological vessels moved with fluid grace that defied conventional physics, their living hulls rippling as internal organs redirected power and resources to weapon systems. The first Council ship to die never even detected the attack. Harbinger's primary weapon system, a biological mass driver that literally grew projectiles from its own tissue, fired a stream of guided organic missiles that penetrated shields designed to stop energy, weapons, and metal projectiles. The living ammunition adapted to the target's defenses, finding weak points and exploiting them with deadly precision. Target eliminated, Harbinger reported with grim satisfaction. Acquiring next threat. Around them, the battle unfolded in 3 dimensions as human bioships engaged Council vessels throughout the formation. The alien's superior firepower was negated by the biological ship's ability to absorb damage and continue fighting. Hull breaches that would cripple conventional vessels simply healed themselves, drawing materials from internal reserves to restore structural integrity. But the real shock came when the Council forces attempted to retreat. Their ships, built for power and durability rather than maneuverability, found themselves unable to escape the bioships that moved like living creatures hunting prey. The human vessels could accelerate and change direction with organic fluidity, using biological field generators that manipulated gravity and inertia in ways that traditional physics engines couldn't match. High Admiral Zethkri, watched in horror as his carefully organized fleet disintegrated into chaos. Ships that had served the Council for centuries were being destroyed by weapons that seemed to violate every principle of known science. His own flagship shuddered as something impacted the main hull, but his sensors insisted there was nothing there. "Emergency transmission to Galactic Command," he ordered. "Request immediate reinforcement. The humans have concealed their true capabilities. This is not a simple quarantine action. Repeat, this is not a simple quarantine action." But the transmission never reached its destination. The bioships had deployed another surprise: living communication jammers that had infiltrated the Council's quantum networks weeks earlier, disguised as random background radiation. The entire interdiction fleet was now cut off from outside contact. Trapped in a system that had suddenly become hostile beyond their worst nightmares, Sarah guided Harbinger through a complex attack pattern that would have been impossible in a conventional fighter. The bioship twisted and rolled through space like a dolphin diving through water, its organic hull adapting to gravitational stresses that would have torn apart any metal framework. 3 Council ships approaching from high solar, Harbinger warned. They're targeting the civilian evacuation transports. The mention of civilian targets triggered something primal in both Sarah and her ship. Harbinger's consciousness flared with protective fury, and Sarah felt her own combat instincts merge with the bioship's evolved predatory responses. They moved as one entity, accelerating toward the threatening Council vessels with deadly intent. The engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. Harbinger's adaptive weapon systems analyzed the enemy ship's defensive capabilities and evolved countermeasures in real time. By the time the Council vessels realized they were under attack, their shields had already been compromised by weapons that had literally redesigned themselves during flight. Throughout the solar system, similar scenes played out as humanity's hidden fleet revealed itself. Bioships that had been dormant for years awakened with the accumulated experience of centuries of genetic memory. They fought not just with advanced technology, but with the instinctive cunning of apex predators that had been designed to hunt in the dark between stars. The Galactic Council had expected to face a primitive species, armed with crude weapons and desperate courage. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that had transcended the traditional boundaries between technology and biology, creating new forms of life dedicated to the principle that freedom was worth any sacrifice. As the first phase of the battle concluded, Admiral Kane received reports from across the fleet. The initial engagement had been decisive. Over 60% of the Council's interdiction force had been destroyed or disabled, with minimal human casualties. But Kane knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy would not accept humanity's defiance quietly, and reinforcements would come. The question was whether humanity could sustain this level of innovation and adaptation against the combined might of 47 alien civilizations. The answer would determine not just Earth's fate, but the future of freedom itself in a galaxy that had forgotten what it meant to fight for independence. 3 months after the Sol system battle, emergency sessions convened across every major world in Council space. The impossible had happened. A primitive species had not only rejected galactic authority, but had inflicted devastating losses on the most advanced military force in known history. The defeat of the interdiction fleet sent shockwaves through civilizations that had known only peace and order for millennia. Chancellor Mirathon of the Crystalline Collective stood before the emergency assembly, her translucent form flickering with stress patterns that betrayed her inner turmoil. "The preliminary analysis is complete," she announced, her voice carrying undertones of disbelief. "The humans have developed biological warfare on a scale we never imagined possible." The chamber erupted in chittering, clicking, and harmonic protest as representatives from 46 species tried to process this information. For the Galactic Council, biological warfare was considered primitive, even barbaric. Advanced civilizations fought with energy weapons, quantum missiles, and antimatter charges. The idea that living creatures could be weaponized to this degree challenged everything they understood about technological progression. High Counselor Korthek of the Machine Consciousness accessed the combat data through direct neural interface. Analysis indicates human vessels demonstrate adaptive capabilities exceeding theoretical maximums, he reported in his mechanical voice. Their weapon systems evolve new configurations during combat. This should not be possible. But the most disturbing intelligence came from the survivors of the interdiction fleet. The few council ships that had escaped the Sol system brought tales that stretched credibility to its breaking point. Enemy vessels that healed battle damage in real time, weapons that learned and adapted to defensive measures, spacecraft that moved like living creatures, hunting with predatory intelligence. Ambassador Zethkri, who had barely escaped the destruction of his flagship, stood to address the assembly. His mandibles still bore scorch marks from the explosion that had claimed half his crew. Honored colleagues, we are not dealing with a conventional military threat. The humans have created something new, something that exists outside our understanding of proper technological development. Deep in the archives of the Galactic Library, xenoarchaeologist Dr. Thulvaran made a discovery that changed everything. The ancient texts spoke of the predecessor wars, conflicts so devastating that they had been deliberately erased from galactic memory. According to the fragmentary records, the galaxy had once been home to species that developed along biological, rather than technological lines, creating living weapons and organic spacecraft that had nearly destroyed all civilization. The Galactic Council itself had been founded specifically to prevent such developments, establishing strict protocols that guided species away from biological warfare and toward more controllable technological advancement. For 10,000 years, this system had worked perfectly, creating a stable galaxy where conflicts were rare and devastating weapons were banned by universal treaty. Now humanity had unknowingly rediscovered the forbidden path. Back in the Sol system, Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the nursery chambers deep within Ceres Station, watching the next generation of bioships take their first tentative movements. The creatures, for that's what they truly were, looked like enormous flowers made of living metal and organic tissue. Each one was unique, shaped by genetic algorithms that combined human engineering with evolutionary pressures no natural environment had ever produced. How many more can we produce? Admiral Kane asked, his voice tight with concern. The victory against the interdiction fleet had bought humanity time. But intelligence reports suggested the Council was mobilizing every available military asset for a massive retaliation. The current breeding population can produce approximately 50 new ships per month, Vasquez replied, her hand resting on the growth chamber of a particularly promising specimen. But that assumes we have enough raw materials and energy to sustain the process. Kane nodded grimly. Humanity's biological fleet was powerful, but it was also resource-intensive. Each bioship required vast amounts of organic compounds, rare elements, and carefully controlled energy inputs during its growth phase. The asteroid belt mining operations were running at maximum capacity, but it might not be enough. What about the consciousness transfers? Kane asked. This was the most delicate aspect of the entire program, ensuring that each bioship developed a stable, cooperative intelligence. Volunteer rates remain high, Vasquez reported. We have over 3,000 applicants for the next generation of pilot bonds. The psychological screening process is intensive, but we're finding compatible partnerships in about 60% of cases. The partnership between human pilots and bioship consciousnesses was unlike anything in galactic history. Each ship was effectively a new form of life, born with human values and goals but possessing capabilities that transcended biological limitations. They could think faster than any computer, adapt quicker than any machine, and coordinate with a precision that made traditional fleet tactics obsolete. Commander Sarah Mitchell and Harbinger had become the template for these partnerships. Their success in battle had demonstrated that the bond between human and bioship could create something greater than the sum of its parts. Now they spent their time training new pilot ship pairs, teaching them how to fight as unified entities rather than separate beings. The new ones learned quickly. Harbinger observed as they watched a training exercise unfold in near-Earth space. Young bioships twisted through asteroid fields with their human partners, learning to merge their thoughts and instincts into seamless combat effectiveness. They have good teachers, Sarah replied through their neural link, and they're going to need every advantage we can give them. The intelligence reports were sobering. The Galactic Council was assembling a war fleet that dwarfed anything seen in recorded history. Over 5,000 ships from dozens of species, armed with weapons that could sterilize entire star systems. The bioships were formidable, but they would be vastly outnumbered. Dr. Vasquez had anticipated this problem. In the deepest levels of the research facility, she and her team were working on something that would either save humanity or destroy it entirely. The project was so classified that only Admiral Kane and a handful of scientists knew of its existence. "We call it the Genesis Protocol," she explained during a private briefing. "If the Council fleet proves too large to defeat conventionally, we have one final option." Kane studied the technical specifications with growing alarm. "Doctor, this is talking about seeding the entire galaxy with bioship spores. The ecological impact would be catastrophic. The impact would be transformative," Vasquez corrected. "Every world touched by the spores would begin developing its own biological ecosystem designed for spacecraft production. Within a century, dozens of species could have access to bioship technology. The implications were staggering. The Genesis Protocol would effectively end the Galactic Council's monopoly on advanced technology by giving every species the tools to defend themselves. It would transform galactic civilization from a carefully controlled hierarchy into a chaotic democracy of equals. The Council would never allow it," Kane said. "The Council wouldn't be able to stop it," Vasquez replied. "Once the spores are released, they'll spread throughout the galaxy using natural stellar winds and cosmic radiation. Every system will be infected within decades." Kane understood the terrible choice they faced. They could fight the conventional war and likely lose, accepting humanity's destruction as the price of defiance. Or they could unleash biological chaos on a galactic scale, ensuring their species' survival, while fundamentally altering the nature of interstellar civilization. As reports arrived of the massive Council fleet massing at the edge of human space, Kane realized the decision might be taken out of his hands. The galaxy had chosen to treat humanity as a threat to be eliminated rather than a species to be integrated. Perhaps it was time to show them what a real threat looked like. The countdown to the largest space battle in galactic history had begun, and humanity stood ready to fight for principles that the galaxy had forgotten existed. Freedom was not negotiable, and independence was worth any price, even if that price was the transformation of the entire galaxy. The Council's revenge fleet materialized at the edge of the Sol system, like a metal continent in space. 5,000 warships from 46 different species created a wall of firepower that stretched across millions of cubic kilometers. Each vessel represented centuries of technological refinement, armed with weapons that could crack planets and shields that had never been breached in recorded history. High Admiral Zethkri stood on the bridge of the new flagship, Galactic Justice, a kilometer-long dreadnought that housed more firepower than some entire planetary defense forces. Around him, holographic displays showed the deployment of the largest military operation in galactic history. This time, there would be no underestimating the human threat. "Long-range scans show minimal human activity," reported his tactical officer. "A few dozen ships detected in standard orbital patterns around Earth and Mars. No sign of the biological vessels that attacked our interdiction fleet." Zethkri's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Intelligence suggested that humanity's bioships were hidden throughout the system, camouflaged and waiting. But the Council had learned from their previous defeat. This fleet carried sensor systems specifically designed to detect biological signatures, weapons optimized for fighting living targets, and tactics developed through months of simulation against adaptive enemies. "Begin the advance," he ordered. "Maintain formation integrity. All vessels are to engage any target that appears to be non-metallic or shows adaptive behavior. Today we end humanity's delusion of independence." The massive fleet began its inexorable advance toward Earth, their combined gravitational fields creating ripples in space-time that could be detected from light years away. It was meant to be an overwhelming display of force, a demonstration that resistance was futile. But deep in the asteroid belt, humanity's response was already underway. Commander Sarah Mitchell felt the collective consciousness of the biofleet stirring as thousands of ships prepared for battle. Through her link with Harbinger, she could sense every vessel in the human fleet. Not just the original 4,000, but nearly 10,000 new ships that had been grown in hidden facilities throughout the outer system. "They come with hate in their hearts," Harbinger observed, its consciousness touching the edges of the approaching fleet's electronic communications. "They seek to exterminate rather than conquer," Sarah nodded grimly. Intelligence intercepts had confirmed the Council's intentions. This wasn't a quarantine action or even a conventional invasion. The galaxy's leadership had decided that humanity represented an existential threat that could only be eliminated through complete annihilation. All bioships, this is Harbinger Prime. Sarah broadcast across the fleet network. Execute swarm protocol. Remember, we're not just fighting for Earth anymore. We're fighting for the right of every species to choose their own evolutionary path. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Throughout the solar system, bioships that had been dormant or camouflaged began to reveal themselves. But this time they didn't attack individually or in small groups. Instead, they moved as a coordinated swarm, their collective intelligence creating a hive mind that could process tactical information faster than any computer network. The first sign of trouble for the Council fleet came from their rear guard. Ships that had been scanning for hidden threats suddenly found themselves surrounded by creatures that seemed to emerge from the vacuum of space itself. The bioships had learned new tricks in the months since the last battle, developing stealth capabilities that made them virtually undetectable until they chose to attack. Strike Pattern Omega. The collective consciousness whispered through the bio-fleet network. Thousands of ships moved as one organism, flowing around the Council formation like water around rocks. Their attacks came from all directions simultaneously. Overwhelming defensive systems designed to handle conventional fleet engagements. High Admiral Zethkri watched his tactical displays with growing alarm as red indicators sprouted across his fleet like a disease. Ships that had been in formation moments before simply vanished from sensors, leaving behind only expanding clouds of debris and atmosphere. "How are they moving so fast?" demanded his tactical officer. "Our sensors show impossible acceleration curves." The answer lay in humanity's latest breakthrough. The bioships had evolved internal gravitational manipulation systems that allowed them to ignore conventional physics. They could accelerate at thousands of Gs without affecting their organic crews, change direction instantaneously, and move through space with the fluid grace of fish swimming through an ocean. But the real shock came when the Council fleet tried to deploy their most powerful weapons. Planet-killer missiles that should have ended the engagement in minutes simply disappeared en route to their targets. The bioships had developed something unprecedented. Weapons that could consume and digest incoming ordnance, converting enemy attacks into energy and raw materials for their own use. Feeding time, Harbinger commented with what might have been humor as it absorbed a quantum torpedo that had been intended to sterilize Mars. The weapon's exotic matter was quickly processed and integrated into the bioship's structure, actually making it stronger. Admiral Kane watched the battle unfold from the command center on Ceres, his face grim as casualty reports flowed in from both sides. The biofleet was performing beyond all expectations, but the sheer size of the Council force meant this would be a war of attrition. Humanity could win individual engagements, but they couldn't sustain losses indefinitely. "Sir," reported Captain Rodriguez, "we're receiving surrender offers from individual Council ships. It appears some species are reconsidering their participation in this operation." Kane wasn't surprised. The Galactic Council had always been a voluntary organization, held together by mutual benefit rather than conquest. As news of the biofleet's capabilities spread through the attacking force, some species were calculating whether humanity's extermination was worth the potential cost to their own fleets, but others were doubling down on their commitment to galactic order. The key Crystalline Collective deployed weapons that turned space itself into a weapon, creating zones of altered physics where bioships found themselves unable to function. The machine consciousness released swarms of self-replicating combat drones that attacked with mechanical precision. The Serpentine hegemony unleashed biological weapons of their own, hoping to poison the bioships from within. For every advantage humanity gained, the Council forces adapted. Their numerical superiority began to tell as the battle stretched across hours, then days. The biofleet's revolutionary capabilities were impressive, but they were still outnumbered, 5-1 by species that had been perfecting warfare for millennia. That was when Dr. Vasquez activated the Genesis protocol. The first spores launched from hidden facilities throughout the outer solar system, riding on streams of charged particles expelled by specially modified bioships. To the Council fleet, they looked like weapon malfunctions or structural failures, clouds of biological debris scattered by battle damage. By the time the Council forces realized what was happening, it was too late. The spores were already spreading beyond the Sol system, carried by solar winds and cosmic radiation toward every inhabited world in the galaxy. Each spore contained the complete genetic template for bioship development, along with the philosophical frameworks that would guide their growth. High Admiral Zethkri received the intelligence report with a horror that transcended species barriers. Biological contamination detected throughout the fleet, his science officer reported. The spores are already beginning to take root in our ship's life support systems. But the most terrifying part wasn't the immediate threat to his fleet. Long-range projections showed the spores spreading throughout Council space, reaching every major world within decades. Each infected planet would begin developing its own bioship capability, creating thousands of potential threats to galactic stability. Recall all forces, Zethkri ordered. Emergency transmission to Galactic Command. The humans have weaponized evolution itself. This is no longer a military conflict. This is the end of civilization as we know it. As the massive Council fleet began its retreat, Admiral Kane stood before the observation window of his command center. The immediate threat was over, but the consequences of humanity's actions would reshape the galaxy for millennia to come. They had won their freedom, but at the cost of galactic stability. Every species would soon have access to bioship technology, whether they wanted it or not. The careful order that had kept the peace for 10,000 years was about to give way to chaotic democracy on a galactic scale. The question now was whether the galaxy would thank humanity for this gift of liberation, or curse them for destroying the only peace it had ever known. 10 years after the Genesis Protocol transformed galactic civilization, Dr. Sarah Chen stood once again before the Galactic Council. But this time, the chamber looked very different from the sterile hall where humanity had been condemned to exile. Living walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Organic pillars grew from the floor like massive trees, and the air itself seemed alive with microscopic organisms that facilitated communication between radically different species. The council itself had been transformed beyond recognition. Where once 47 species had dictated terms to the rest of the galaxy, now over 300 civilizations participated as equals. Each had developed their own interpretation of bioship technology, creating unique evolutionary paths that reflected their cultural values and biological nature. Ambassador Cathara of the Valtheran Empire approached Chen's position in the speaker's circle. Her species had been among the most vocal opponents of humanity's independence, but the decade of change had altered her perspective dramatically. Her own people now sailed through space in vessels that looked like crystalline butterflies. Beautiful and deadly in equal measure, Dr. Chen, she said, her voice carrying none of the condescension that had marked their previous encounter. The Valtheran Collective wishes to formally apologize for our actions during the Exile crisis. We failed to understand that diversity of thought and development strengthens rather than threatens galactic civilization. Chen nodded graciously, though she couldn't entirely suppress a smile. The transformation of galactic politics had been chaotic, sometimes violent but ultimately liberating. Species that had been carefully managed for millennia suddenly found themselves free to pursue their own destinies, and the results had been spectacular. The Crystalline Collective had developed bioships that existed partially in higher dimensions, allowing them to explore regions of space that had been completely inaccessible. The machine consciousness had created hybrid vessels that merged biological intuition with digital precision, achieving technological capabilities that surpassed both approaches individually. Even the Serpentine hegemony had embraced the new paradigm, growing ships that could exist both in space and underwater, opening entire ocean worlds to exploration. The apology is accepted, Chen replied formally. But perhaps we should focus on the future rather than the past. The galaxy has proven more resilient than any of us expected. That resilience had been tested repeatedly over the past decade. The sudden democratization of advanced military technology had triggered dozens of regional conflicts as species settled old grievances or pursued territorial ambitions. But it had also created new alliances and partnerships based on mutual respect, rather than hierarchical control. Humanity itself had struggled with the consequences of their actions. The bioship technology had spread far beyond their ability to control or guide its development. Some species had created vessels of terrible destructive power, while others had focused on exploration and peaceful expansion. The galaxy had become a more dangerous place, but also a more interesting one. Commander Sarah Mitchell, now Admiral of the Human Biofleet, materialized via quantum projection from her flagship. Her partnership with Harbinger had evolved over the years, creating a hybrid consciousness that existed both within and beyond conventional human experience. The latest reports from the Outer Rim are encouraging, she announced to the Assembly. The Catherian Collective has successfully established contact with extragalactic civilizations using bioships capable of intergalactic travel. The implications for cultural and technological exchange are staggering. This was perhaps the most profound change brought about by the Genesis Protocol. The biological approach to spacecraft development had removed many of the physical limitations that had confined galactic civilization to a single galaxy. Ships that could grow and adapt were naturally suited for the vast journeys between galaxies, opening possibilities that had been theoretical for millennia. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now Director of Galactic Biological Research, presented her latest findings to the Council. The data was both fascinating and concerning. The bioship spores had continued to evolve and adapt throughout their spread across the galaxy, developing capabilities that even their creators hadn't anticipated. "We're observing convergent evolution on a galactic scale," she explained, her words accompanied by holographic displays showing bioship development across different species. Despite completely different starting points, many civilizations are independently developing similar capabilities. This suggests that there may be optimal forms for space-based biological entities. The implications were profound. If bioships were evolving toward similar configurations regardless of their origins, it suggested that humanity had accidentally discovered fundamental principles of cosmic biology. The galaxy might be moving toward a new form of unified civilization based on shared evolutionary pressures rather than imposed political control. High Counselor Korthik of the Machine Consciousness had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation of any individual. His mechanical form now incorporated biological components that allowed him to interface directly with bioship consciousnesses, creating a unique perspective on the merger of artificial and natural intelligence analysis. Indicates that the distinction between biological and technological development is becoming meaningless, he reported. Many species now employ hybrid approaches that combine the best aspects of both paradigms. The binary classification system that once defined galactic civilization is no longer relevant. But the most significant change was philosophical rather than technological. The rigid hierarchy that had characterized galactic civilization for 10,000 years had given way to a more fluid, dynamic structure. Species rose and fell in influence based on their contributions and innovations rather than their adherence to established protocols. The Galactic Council itself had transformed from a governing body into something more like a forum for discussion and coordination. Decisions were made through consensus building and voluntary cooperation rather than authoritarian decree. It was messier, more chaotic, but also more representative of the galaxy's incredible diversity. Dr. Chen addressed the Assembly one final time as humanity's representative. 10 years ago, we stood before this council as defendants in a trial that would have condemned our species to exile or extinction. Today we stand as partners in the greatest expansion of knowledge and capability in galactic history. She paused, looking around the chamber at representatives from hundreds of worlds, each one now free to pursue their own vision of the future. We didn't fight for humanity's right to exist. We fought for every species' right to determine their own destiny. The galaxy is a more dangerous place now, but it's also more alive, more creative, and more hopeful than it has ever been. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of different voices from dozens of species rose in affirmation. The sounds merged into a harmonic symphony that represented the new galactic civilization, diverse, chaotic, but united in their commitment to freedom and growth. As the session concluded, Chen found herself approached by a young delegate from a species she didn't recognize. Their bioship technology had allowed them to expand from their home system for the first time in their species' history. Dr. Chen, the young alien said through their translation device, "My people were confined to our homeworld for thousands of years by the Council's development restrictions. Now we sail between the stars in ships grown from our own dreams. How can we ever thank humanity for this gift?" Chen smiled, remembering her own species' journey from a single world to galactic citizenship. By using that freedom wisely, she replied. By helping others find their own path to the stars. By proving that diversity makes us stronger, not weaker. As she returned to her ship for the journey back to Earth, Chen reflected on the incredible transformation that had reshaped galactic civilization. Humanity had struck first not out of aggression, but out of a fundamental belief that freedom was worth any risk. They had faced extinction and chosen to fight rather than submit. The galaxy had tried to exile Earth, treating humanity as a threat to stability and order. In response, humanity had given every species the tools to become threats themselves, democratizing power on a scale that made the old council structure obsolete. It was the most human response possible. When faced with oppression, they had chosen to make oppression impossible rather than simply fighting their own oppressors. The future was uncertain, chaotic, and full of potential conflicts, but it was also filled with infinite possibility, as hundreds of species explored new ways of existing among the stars. The galaxy had learned that true stability came not from rigid control, but from the dynamic balance of free peoples choosing their own destinies. Humanity had struck first, but in the end, everyone won.